How do we thaw ice? Stop feeding the freeze.
Perception is reality. Perspective shapes the world around you. I'm JJ Weinberg, and this is my perspective.
Greetings and salutations. My name is JJ Weinberg. I am an artist, an activist, an alchemist, a musician, an author, a radio show host, and I am none of these things. How can I be none of these things if I'm here talking to you on WVLP.org? I say this at the beginning of every episode to kind of let you know some of who I might be if you're not familiar with my work and what I do, but also as a reminder to myself that I'm not defined by narrow boundaries. I'm here on WVLP.org every Saturday at noon. Reruns are on Wednesdays at 6 p.m. Unless, of course, I have a special episode that airs that Wednesday. I want to thank the underwriters for this program, Voga, Barnes, and Denny. I wouldn't be here without their support. If you listened to last week's episode about my friend, my godson, Jeremiah, I want to make sure and begin this episode and say gently and with zero judgment, if you're listening and you feel like you're slipping towards the edge, you don't have to carry that alone. In the United States, you can call or text 988. You can also chat online through the same service. Call 911 even. And I know that it might not feel like you want to do that. And in some ways, it's like no one person, no chat line, no text, not this show, not anyone in your family or friend network might be able to answer anything alone. And the questions that you're asking and the things that you're feeling are bigger than any one person. But I just want to remind you that belonging matters. Your heart, there are people who will listen. And I'm not saying this as a slogan. I'm saying it that I don't have the answers to your pain. I can't assume that I do. And I think it's even profoundly arrogant to imagine that one person can solve the question of your pain, but one person can be the light of love. One person can remind you that you're not alone. None of us are an island. I talked about that a lot in the last episode. And so one person can provide an opening, a new angle, a new perspective. And last week when I spoke about my friend Jeremiah, I spoke about grief. I spoke about the winter season. And I want to begin today by staying right there in the truth of it. You know, winter isn't an allegory. It's not a metaphor when the wind hits your face. Winter is not a metaphor when silence fills a room that used to hold laughter. So winter is not a metaphor when the world feels indifferent to your ache. But winter is also a teacher. If we can listen long enough to hear what it's trying to say, these seasons in our life. So that brings me to what I want to put on the table at the beginning of this hour. And it doesn't solve anything, but it names the question honestly. Albert Camus wrote, in essence, that there's only one true, serious philosophical problem. The question of whether life is or isn't worth living. So that's not a cheerful opening. And it's icy season. And we have a lot of ice around us. And I'm not here to pretend that it's cheerful, but it's a truthful opening. And in these times, truth is mercy. A little context. Camus was a French-Algerian writer, thinker, often associated with absurdism. He wrote into a world where meaning had been shattered by war, ideology, propaganda, and the cold machinery of cruelty. His work, it doesn't hand us a tidy answer. It hands us the question with clean hands and says, let's look at this without flinching. So he argued that human beings look for meaning. The universe doesn't hand it over in a neat package. And collision creates what he called the absurd. So the temptation is when the absurd becomes unbearable is to escape. To escape by ending life or by grabbing a belief system like a raft without taking the time and care to examine it. So he pushes back against both, not because he's denying pain, but because he demands an honesty that can hold pain without lying about it. So that's where I want to begin in this winter, with Jeremiah in my heart, with you in my ear, and Camus on the table. Not to romanticize despair. I can't stand that notion. Not to glamorize darkness, but to name the seriousness of the human question. And now, with that seriousness held gently, I want to offer an allegory, not as a gimmick, but as a lantern. Because winter's been speaking to us in a language that we can feel in our bones. Ice. What is it? If I just say ice right now, it means so many different things in this winter season. In February of 2026, ice brings up danger. But there's a metaphor. What kind of ice are we talking about? Where does it come from? In the winter, in this cold tundra that we live in, that you're listening in, if you're in Northwest Indiana, Chicagoland area, if you're up here, and heck, even yesterday I saw that Iceland was warmer than the southern tip of Florida. So we're all dealing with a little bit of cold right now, no matter where we're at in the northern hemisphere, if you're in the United States. But ice is water slowed. Essentially, the molecules in the water slow down and they become hardened into this experience of ice. And so I'm in the position right now where I want to melt this ice. I want to melt ice around hearts. I want to melt ice on the streets. And I mean that in both ways. It's slippery. Ice is slippery, but I want to melt it. I don't want to crush it. Because we stay in the cold. If we stay in that frigid cold, crushing it isn't going to do the job. We need to make it flow like water again, to make it flow, to give that life-giving source that water gives us. But to make it flow, we have to melt it. We have to bring up the temperature of our perspective. And I don't believe that bringing up that temperature means fighting it and crushing it. I think it means bringing the sun. Let the sun rise on this. Bring the heat of so much love, of so much compassion, that we bring up the temperature of our perspective. And then we realize at some point, if we use this water analogy, that if we bring this water to a boil, then it returns to vapor. So even ice goes from this hardened, cold, cruel thing that we're experiencing right now in and on our streets to vapor. It's the same substance. Water is soft. Ice is hard. Vapor is unseen. But we bring water down. It condenses from the cloud of our imagination. But if we lower that temperature, we slow vibration, it freezes into form, it crystallizes. So notice that ice isn't some outside evil. Ice isn't a foreign substance. Ice is water under a different condition. So in the language of chemistry, this is phase, not essence. It's the same molecules arranged differently. When temperature drops, the average kinetic energy drops. That kinetic energy, molecular motion slows, and water can lock into a crystalline lattice, an ordered structure shaped by hydrogen bonding, often described for ordinary ice as hexagonal arrangement, right? So this is not mysticism, this is physics. But the mystic is paying attention to physics because the world is full of scripture, if we can learn to listen. I wrote a song about this actually in 2000, I think it was 2000, maybe right around 2000. Tony and I wrote this song. It's called Shake Infinite. And my first verse starts, vibrate, gyrate, and show you got some energy. Spin with it inwardly, then we'll begin to free. Possibility, defrost lost ability. Skillfully, we'll build a bridge across hostility. The exchange of our natural force will change our dismal course. Explore the core us, chant into our source. Shake infinite. Shake infinite, escape the desolate, and shake infinite. So anyway, I'm giving you the lyrics to the song. I'll play it sometime in the future. I'm actually working on a redone 2026 version of the song now. So 26 years later, revisiting it. Because why? Listen to that lyric. If you go over that again and you hear defrost lost ability, skillfully will build a bridge across hostility. I wrote that 26 years ago. It's what we need to do right now. I was talking at that time, I wasn't talking about ice particularly, like even the notion of an ice cube. I was talking about just material matter in general. They say that, we're basically made up of 99% empty space, but matter is energy fluctuating in and out of the void at such a high rate that we can't catch up with it with our senses. And so then it materializes into solid form. So what I was saying at that point was, let's shake infinite. Let's vibrate at that highest level, that highest frequency that we have in our mind, in our hearts, in our imagination, and see what we can do to change our state. So ice is water, but the water has just then agreed to hold still. Ice is water that's taken a posture, stern. And if ice is water slowed, then what is this cruelty? Why does this winter feel so cruel? Why does the ice on the streets feel so cruel? And I'm not just talking about, even again, the presence of people. I'm talking about, look at how deeply the metaphor works. If you have that ice on the streets, you lose control. You slip off the side of the road. So cruelty is maybe like love slowed until it can't move. That energy of love. Cruelty being compassion frozen into a posture. Cruelty like a human heart losing circulation. So that's why maybe winter feels like a deep emotion, because often it is. So we're not just talking about weather. we're talking about the inner season, the inner climate, that climate inside of you. So ice is water slowed, focused pattern. So back to Shake Infinite, vibrate at the highest level. Let's look at it again. Nikola Tesla. You want to know the secrets of the universe. Think in terms of frequency and vibration. Think in terms of energy, right? I mean, it's crazy to me when I look back, writing that song Shake Infinite through an intuitive state of tapping into something and listening to this inner whisper, only to then read a quote by one of the most profound thinkers of all time, and Nikola Tesla, and have it mirror so much of what I was feeling at that time. But that line, it's widely shared, and its sourcing is questionable, and it's not necessarily verified directly to Tesla, but he always spoke in the language of frequency and vibration, especially, describing electricity. It's a high frequency phenomenon. In his published work, he explicitly refers to high frequency currents and the rate of vibration in discussing electrical effects. So the way that I feel like we should treat that quote today is not like as a holy verse or dogma and doctrine, not as a magical spell, but as a doorway into real pattern. Because even if the exact sentence isn't verified to be right under Tesla, the underlying point is still useful. Frequency and vibration are real descriptors of real phenomena. Sound is vibration. You're hearing my voice. The only way you're hearing my voice is through this vibration. You're catching my vibes right now. If you're into the radio station, we've talked about this before. If you're listening on the radio, you're tuned into the frequency. And even if you aren't listening on the radio, you're tuned into the frequency of this idea, either of me personally, and you just know me and listen and are doing that, or you've somehow discovered it and it's resonating with you. And light can be described in terms of electromagnetic waves. Heat at the molecular level is related to motion, the restless dance of particles. Again, that's what that Shake Infinite was. It's about being a dance. And in a poetic sense, your life has that frequency. Not because you're a crystal in a wizard's pocket, but because you're a pattern of attention, behavior, habit, breath, choice, and relationship. So, coming back to that line, it always makes me we get vibes. It makes me think of that. We catch a room's vibes, a person's vibes, the culture's vibes right now, the milieu of where we're at, what we're living in has a vibe, a vibration. So it's both poetic and honest because, again, there's real science under the metaphor, but, the metaphor can outrun the science if we let it. So we always got to try and stay grounded. But thinking of fields and vibes, we have the science. We understand this, that it shows that we have an electromagnetic field that resonates and radiates beyond our skull. Our skull has, in our brain, we have electromagnetic pulses. That's what it is. But it doesn't just stay inside this shell that is our brain. There's a energy field, an electromagnetic field because of that activity in our brain that goes outside of our physical skull. The basis of MEG is a non-invasive technique that measures the magnetic fields produced by electrical currents in the brain. So a key scientific detail here is sobering and beautiful at the same time. These fields are extremely small, often discussed in ranges that we don't even perceive. And MEG systems need extremely sensitive devices and shielding from external magnetic noise. But we still know that fields extend beyond the skull. But they're not like a lighthouse beam, but they're real, measurable, even if they're delicate. Now, the heart is also an electrical organ in motion. Each heartbeat is an electrical event that you can measure with an ECG. And that electrical activity also produces magnetic fields. So the clinical and engineering reality of measuring heart-generated magnetic fields, MCG, detects magnetic fields produced by electrical currents of the heart using, again, very sensitive equipment. But there's a bridge between science and everyday language of, vibes. Science is saying there are measurable bioelectromagnetic fields produced by brain and heart activity, and specialized instruments can detect them. And everyday life says when you walk into a room, you often can sense tension or warmth, fear, joy, hostility, calm, whatever it is. But that everyday sensing is usually explained by perceptions of cues, tone of voice, posture, facial expression, context, and memory, and not necessarily by us consciously detecting someone's heart magnetic field, like we have a built-in magnetometer. But still, I want to keep the poetry here and not turn it into snake oil. Perception is reality. I said that at the beginning of every show. A lot of times when we walk into these rooms, it's the way we perceive it that makes it as such. But we get vibes because we're pattern recognition creatures. And we're also social instruments. Social media, social environments, we're sending off these signals. So we're tuned by evolution to detect safety and danger. We're always reading a room, always, even when we think we're not. And we're reading our culture. We're reading everything around us. So beneath profiling and prejudice, beneath projection and noise, beneath the frantic scroll and the algorithm's agitation, there's still a quieter kind of knowing that comes when you truly pay attention. That's the vibe that I trust, the vibe of attention, not the vibe of superstition. So when I say that beyond the skull, beyond the heart, we are broadcasting, I mean it like this. Your life emits a pattern. Your choices repeat, your tone repeats, your attention repeats, your nervous system repeats, and over time, that repetition becomes a form. It becomes a crystal. We've talked about this before. I have a episode specifically called Consistency is the Crystal. Thought is a form. It's the vapor of imagination we can materialize. So think of thought manifesting a chair. There's a form that exists in the ether called chair, and thought manifests it as a technology. That's why Albert Einstein, though, when I think about imagination, said that imagination was more important than knowledge. He expands that idea even by contrasting the limits of knowledge with the world encircling reach of imagination. I think he's saying the limits of knowledge go so far because imagination brings us the next question. That's why when we've talked about AI here, and I've run up against this so many times in different aspects of using AI as a tool, where it lacks imagination. It can't ask the question. And imagination is what leads us to the question, which leads us to new knowledge. So imagination is vapor. And I don't mean like it's fake. It's formless. Vapor is real water, but you can't grasp it like a rock. You can't grasp it like a cruel, cold ice cube. And imagination is real mind. You just can't measure it like a brick. You know vapor by its effects. It fogs the window. It gathers into clouds. It turns the invisible into weather. And so imagination is similar. You know it's there by its effects. It designs the chair before the chair exists in reality. It hears the song before the speakers exist. It sees a home before the foundation is poured. It can also taste a kinder world before that kindness is practiced. So imagination is not a hallucination. It's a blueprint. A blueprint isn't the building, but without the blueprint, the building is an accident. I mean, how else does the building get built? So we don't worship imagination as if it's like magic dust. We honor imagination as the first draft of reality. We honor imagination as the vapor phase of creation. And this matters because of the ice that we've created. So I've talked about I am, the notion of I am being technology of the imagination, the image of self that crystallizes. A crystal is a molecular pattern. So you can decode the crystal that you want to freeze into reality. You can identify that pattern. Then it's a map. You make a decision from your future self, and the consistency of your pattern will be looked at and called discipline. Again, this is what I spoke about in that episode called Consistency is the Crystal. Because at that time, I was saying discipline will get you there. Discipline plus direction equals destiny. But I realized that discipline now, as I look at it, and this is just within the last 6 to 8 months that I've had this kind of opening in my mind, is that discipline isn't thrust on us from the outside. It's the internal decision. It's the internal map. And if we look at discipline, if we talk about discipline as if it's being thrust on us, it's always going to feel like self-flagellation, like we're whipping ourselves, like we're beating ourselves into some sort of submission. So if we slow down this here and widen the frame a little bit, and we talk about like a crystal, in the most grounded scientific language, it's a solid material in which the atoms are arranged in a definite repeating pattern. So the surface regularity reflects internal symmetry. Like if I said that to you, there's a repeating pattern in your life. Your life is a crystal, and the surface regularity reflects internal symmetry. That's not self-help talk. That's mineralogy. Mineralogy. That's a weird word. I hope I'm saying that right. So when I say consistency is the crystal, I'm not forcing a metaphor on the world. I'm noticing what the world is already doing. This is what a crystal is. A crystal is what repetition looks like when it becomes visible. A crystal is what pattern looks like when it becomes touchable. A crystal is behavior that stopped arguing with itself. So that brings me to the question. I love it because it exposes this as an illusion. Do you call a crystal disciplined? Is a diamond in its multifaceted luster and elegant prism of refracting light, is it a discipline? No. I mean, you don't call a crystal, a diamond, an emerald, a ruby, you don't call it disciplined. You call it formed. You call it coherent. You call it what happens when the conditions are consistent enough that the pattern has no choice but to emerge. So maybe discipline just isn't the right word. Maybe discipline is what it looks like from the outside when you don't understand the inside. Maybe discipline is what observers call your pattern when they can't see the depth of your decision. Because the real key is that the decision happens in an instant, the present. Time is only how it slows into form. Again, this was in a song I wrote years ago. I might have mentioned it here on the show before, where I say in a verse, peep my reflection. The present slips from detection, perfection lost in the past, too fast for our perception. Kept in deception till I fashion myself a weapon. And through the looking glass of recollection, I recall my connection. Divine complexion, see my body in time as a contrasting projection. But in unified mind, I find resurrection, everlasting life, and God's light directing. And it came from a moment when I was listening to, I think it was like on Discovery Channel or something, about just this notion that a star's light, by time it reaches our eye and we process it, that it's in the past and the star's gone. But it was so far away that by time it reaches us, the light, and then it processes through our synapses and we absorb it and we understand it, it's in the past. And so one time I was looking in the mirror and I realized, wait a second. If I expand to that distance, if I realize that there's still that much space, there's a certain amount of space between myself and the mirror in front of me, and the way that the light has to bounce off the mirror, come into my eye, and then form an image in my brain, I'm looking at the past. When you look at a mirror, you're literally looking at the past. So that's why I said the present slips from detection. I think I'm looking at myself in the present, but the present's infinitely smaller. It's not inside of any sort of time. And so your decision is fire. It's spirit. And it's even beyond mind and body. It's the formation of choice. And that's, again, Viktor Frankl. I've talked about it so many times. He comes in like a bell ringing in the fog. In his work and his legacy, he says that a human being is a deciding being. Famous again for naming that there's a space between stimulus and response. And that's what I'm it's too fast for my perception. I was kept in deception until I fashioned myself, selfhood, my crystal, my decision, my human decision. I fashioned that as a weapon. And that's that space where our freedom lives, the space where we choose our attitude, our action, our way of being. So I am is the spirit deciding. I am is the fire that illuminates the pattern in being present, a pattern stretched over time. So I am's not just a phrase. It's a claim. It's a signature. I am is the match, and your life is the candle. Time is the wax. Your life is a candle. Time is the wax. And the flame is always now. So it takes intense pressure, right? In this dark, compressed tomb of the earth to create a diamond. It takes time and pressure and heat to form that gem, like the gem of the dream in your heart. Compression under time. This is the grounding science. Like a natural diamond is formed deep within the earth's mantle under high pressure and temperature, commonly discussed in depths on the order of like 140 to 190 kilometers. And they reach the surface by being carried in fast volcanic eruptions. Diamonds are carbon in a specific crystal structure. The carbon atoms are bonded in a rigid lattice that gives diamonds their famous hardness. And so laboratory experiments show the transformation of graphite to diamonds at high pressure and temperature. So we have this allegory, this metaphor that's forming, and it's not pretty, but it's talking about the compression of heat and time. It's a faithful metaphor. The diamond is born in pressure, in the dark, and that's why it shines. So listen to the question again, because it's a razor blade. Did it take discipline or vision? It took conditions. It took consistency. It took a reality where carbon wasn't allowed to remain a softer story. And that's why the inner life matters, because your inner life is the condition, the soil, the dirt. If your inner life is chaos, your outer life is a fog of half-formed intentions. If your inner life is coherent, your outer life begins to crystallize. Not because the universe is your personal genie, but because your attention stops scattering, because your choices stop contradicting each other, because you stop making promises in the morning and then breaking them at night, because you stop being 2 people, 3 people, 4 people. A house divided can't stand, not even the house of one mind. So once the crystal is identified and named, it makes me think of, again, parallels to the movie The Dark Crystal and The Neverending Story. And when Atreyu rides past this crystal field, I remember always loving that scene. It's like for half a second, you see this field of crystals. And I always love that for some reason. And I have the Jupiter stone in my Bob Ross metaverse in Fromoville in the Bobberverse. But the crystal named is claimed through pattern. It doesn't really take place over time. That's the illusion, the Maya. Maya in Hindu and related Indian philosophical traditions is described as a power or appearance of the phenomenal world that can be mistaken for ultimate reality, an illusion. Not in the sense that nothing exists, but in the sense that we misperceive, we cling and identify with appearances as if they're the final truth. So when I'm saying it doesn't take place over time, that's the illusion. I'm saying time is real as a sequence, but time is not where the power lives, not of your decision. Power lives in the present. This is our time. The present is our time. Wherever you're hearing this, whenever you're hearing this, it's 2026 as I say it, but you might hear it in 2037. And that's our time because you're sharing this time with me. The past is not our time. The future is not our time. Time is the riverbed and the present is the water. So if you try to change your life by fighting time, you're going to lose because time isn't listening, but the present is listening. The present is the only place that you can answer back. The present is where you can decide. And the decision is always now. The past, usually full of regret. The future, full of worry. But we don't live in the future. We don't live in the past. Now is all we've got. So this is why regret is so cruel. It freezes the present by worshiping a past you can't enter. It freezes the present by worshiping a past you can't enter. It's why anxiety is so cruel. It freezes the present by worshiping a future that you're not going to see. You can't control it, not in the future. You control it from now. So regret and anxiety are these time travel fantasies. And they both steal the only currency that you actually have, now. So the notion is really that God can't be found outside. It's in your decision, whatever this idea of God is. I always approach God as the ultimate mystery, the question, not dogma, not a guy in the sky, all of that stuff. Really, it's internal. And so I'm not trying to, Bible preach or bang here or anything like that. But from the Bible, this is Exodus 3:14. I am who I am. A phrase that's, basically circling the mystery of being itself. So I'm not here to turn scripture into a sales pitch. I'm just trying to point at the internality of it, the I am, not I was, not I will be, I am. And if you want to find this mystery outside, you can spend your whole life chasing a mirage across deserts of ideology, across dunes of ego, across temples built out of fear. But if this mystery is being itself, if what we call God is the breath behind your breath, inspiration, if it's the fire that says, I am, then the divine is not touched by running away from yourself. The divine is found by becoming honest enough to inhabit your own soul. That's why the decision is sacred and this perception is reality is so important because the decision is where we stop pretending. And you go into as above, so below. And I've always thought of it as within, so without. What's inside will always be revealed. So again, we could go back to the Bible if you want to go there. There's a line in the Gospels, Luke 8:17, teaching that nothing is hidden that will not be made manifest. Nothing is secret that will not be known and come to light. So what is inside will be revealed, not as punishment, as physics, as the crystal, as consequence, as harvest. I have a whole episode will be talking about seed time and harvest, Neville Goddard. The harvest, the shape of reality. You can hide a seed in the soil, but you can't hide the tree it becomes. So if you want to plant deadly nightshade, don't expect an apple tree. You can hide hatred behind manners, but you can't hide the tone that it leaks into your life. You can't hide a frigid, cruel, icy demeanor. You can hide grief behind jokes, but you can't hide the ache that it presses into your sleep. You can hide fear behind control, but you can't hide the cold it brings into your relationships. As within, so without. The inside writes the outside. And so I've talked about this before. We're the dreamer. We create the reality through vapor. The dream is vapor, the quantum reality of the observer. So here's a scientific leg. I don't want to turn quantum mechanics into a sermon either, but in quantum theory, measurement is not passive. The act of measuring involves interaction, and that interaction can affect the system, which is why the measurement problem exists. The role of observation becomes a foundational question in the interpretation of quantum mechanics. And this can get sloppy, but observer in physics doesn't have to mean a conscious mind staring at particles with mystical intention, right? In many interpretations and explanations, an observer can be any physical system that interacts in a way that yields a measurement outcome. And the technical problem is about how definite outcomes arise from quantum descriptions. So the scientific point is not your thoughts magically collapse reality into riches. The scientific point is interaction matters, conditions matter, measurement matters. So that's how this metaphor can be faithful, because in human life, attention functions like measurement. What we repeatedly attend to becomes more real in our experience. Perception is reality, not because the universe is our puppet, but because our nervous system is being trained. Our habits are being trained. We're finding that pattern. Look again at the crystal that you want to become, the emerald, the diamond. Look at the pattern of its molecular structure as a map. But our choices are being trained. So if you live in a cold scroll, if you live in outrage, if you live in contempt, if you live in constant suspicion, you're measuring the world through that lens, through a dirty filter. The lens is dirty itself. We have to clean the lens. We have to cleanse the doors of perception. William Blake says, if the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. But again, we're measuring the world through a lens, and our life begins to crystallize into the shape of our measurement. So if we live in presence, if you live in listening, if you live in courage, if you live in tenderness, you measure differently. You interact differently. You become different. It's not magic. It might look like it on the outside, but it's the physics of the soul. So in the dream state, we are the leper and we are love. We are the enemy at the gate, the wolves, the ice. We are the cold cruelty. In the dream, we manifest at the speed of thought. It's all vapor, but we are the hero. We're also the light and the flame. We are one with the Father who sent us to that stage, because in the dream, we wake up to understand we are the God of our own internal drama in the dream. So look at that allegory and lay it over our life. Notice the mercy of it. If we can contain both the wolf and the shepherd, then we're not doomed to be the wolf. If we contain both the cold and the fire, then we can choose the warmth. If we contain both cruelty and compassion, then we can stop pretending that cruelty is just the way the world is. The world's not one thing. It's a field of choices. And as Viktor Frankl reminds us, a human being is a deciding being. Time is the tesseract. There's a cold, cruel cube, this ice cube on our doorstep, a cold violence, a frozen form that rejects the love of the burning heart. The frigid frequency where we're at now has us wanting to shiver. This cold emotion, slow movement of love, ice in our veins, ice in our streets. We look beyond politics and the imaginary lines that we draw around maps as borders. we start to see something else forming. Two registers at once, talking about this substance that forms the winter and a system in the United States and a larger climate of fear, suspicion, division, and dehumanization that can gather around borders, paperwork, and power. So if we look beyond politics, we often see it's just wrestling masks over deeper spiritual weather. The deeper issue is the coldness. The deeper issue is the way a society can normalize cruelty by calling it policy. The deeper issue is how easily human beings can be turned into categories and then treated as less than human. That's winter, not outside, but inside. That's why we take imagination from Einstein and vibration and frequency from Tesla as tools for shaping our reality, carving it, molding it. What we're doing here is not selling a crystal necklace and calling it salvation. We're naming patterns, naming temperature, naming the ways we freeze each other. And all I'm saying is that we can melt it. We can find a way to flow again. We can look at this correlation across science and math, the greatest thinkers with love and the fire of the mystics. We see the diamond, the amethyst, the emerald, and we know that they're not disciplines. They appear that way only when we get caught in the illusion of time, when we lose track of the power of the present and the fire of decision. It feels outside of us because it feels outside of our time. We talked about this earlier. Overwhelmed by the calendar, drowning in the long distance of the mountain. The person who thinks discipline means dragging themselves across 365 days like a prisoner in chains. No, that's not your time. 365 days from now is not your time. Your time is now. And if you can stay in now, you can do holy things in small measures. You can drink water. You can take a breath. You can make a call, apologize, forgive. You can walk outside. You can turn off the screen. You can eat with intention. You can lift a weight. You can read a page. You can write a page. You can take a step. That's your time now. It's like with personal training, I always have told my clients, the good news is the bad news. It doesn't happen in a day. It's a happening. And it's happening every day that you show up. This is true in the gym, and it's true in grief. It's true in healing. It's true in love. We don't become strong by wishing. We become strong by repetition. And repetition becomes pattern, and pattern becomes a crystal. But the choice to repeat is always now. You don't make that choice tomorrow. You don't make that choice yesterday. It's now. Now is your time. You don't live a year at a time. You live in this moment. You only have to do today's work. This is where you decide. So don't get caught up in the anxiety of how hard is it going to be for me to do this for a week? You don't have to do anything for a week. You don't live a week at a time. You live now. So you lose yourself in regrets of yesterday and worry of tomorrow, but they simply don't exist. They just do not exist. You see the cruelty of time in this. Yesterday and tomorrow are real as concepts, but they're not real as rooms that you can stand in. Come back to now, come back to your breath, come back to your decision. Because again, decision is not a discipline from an outer force, but a map to the form. The crystal has a molecular pattern. Your emerald has its composition. So just choose. Thought, vibration, tuning in with frequencies. These things lead us to our inevitable form. Imagination comes before reality because reality is an extension of our perception. What we focus on materializes. Choose your own adventure. Again, the space that Viktor Frankl reminds us of. We're not punished into becoming. We're patterned into becoming. The outer world can pressure you, but the inner world decides what that pressure becomes. Pressure can crush coal into a diamond, like we talked about before. Pressure can also crush a person into bitterness. The difference is not the pressure. The difference is the inner temperature. The difference is whether the fire of the spirit remains lit. So when it comes to losing weight or shaping your physical body, let alone your emotional or financial body, you don't think, can I show up 365 days in a row? That's not your time. And even if we mine a diamond from our mine, we extract it from the rough, it comes prepared to be cleaved. It needs cut again and polished, but it needs cut on a plan to get the most specific planes. And even then, it can only be cut by sawing with other diamond impregnated blades or a modern laser that can cut in the direction and get it prepared for the stages of polishing. A hard diamond cannot be shaped by softer materials. Your diamond cuts, and that's the allegory. If you want to shape a hard life, you need a harder truth. Not hard as in cruel, but harder as in real, harder as in unflinching. A soft lie cannot cut a hard reality, and a soft excuse cannot carve a strong future. Only diamond cuts diamond. So we come back to ice. I woke up the day after Jeremiah's funeral, and I was listening to this audiobook randomly on YouTube, and it's called They Must Fall, talking about the walls of Jericho by Florence Scovel Shinn. And I wake up and I'm hearing this metaphor on ice, on the molecular structure and the allegory of how it shapes our reality, but I feel it when I step outside, not outside of my house in this barren, brutal winter, but when I step outside of myself into this so-called social media tundra. I feel this cruel cold when I step outside. When I step outside of our time, when I step outside of now, it's freezing out there. Inside is the light. Inside is a fire of imagination and a warmth of love. But when I step outside, I see the ice hanging like a prison of deadly daggers. It's the heat of my imagination rising through my internal furnace of my imagination and compassion, meeting a poorly insulated roof and finding gutters that didn't quite flow. So I'm stepping outside and seeing all of these images. Heat rises, warmth rises, compassion rises. But if the system is poorly insulated, if the system is broken, and if the flow is blocked, the warmth meets cold, and what should have moved becomes dangerous. Icicles are frozen. Movement is arrested into sharpness, into a cage. And that's what happens to human beings when love can't circulate. Everything becomes sharp, defensive, like a blade. Love itself even frozen into a weapon by fear. So the ice is our making. It's painful to realize, but this winter season on our experience is our making. And when I think about the weeping prophet, I see that he felt the pain of people so deeply it broke his heart. This cold, cruel world shattered my own friend Jeremiah's crystal like a prophet that shattered a clay pot. It shattered his space for belonging. We must heat this internal furnace to melt this ice. We have to raise our sun. The sun must rise in our consciousness to see the spring of renewal, to raise the temperature and increase this vibration. Love is our only chance of melting this ice.
How do we thaw ice? Stop feeding the freeze.
Perception is reality. Perspective shapes the world around you. I'm JJ Weinberg, and this is my perspective.